Hey guys. All right, we start our next read aloud. Last time, we had just left the group discovering Danielle's grandmother on the floor. So, we're going to see where things go. Chapter Peter. Once I pushed my way through the crowd and saw what was going on, my mind went back to that day in the snow when Mr. T was the one lying on the ground, unresponsive. Danielle knelt behind him and gently slid her hat and coat underneath his head. Luke was also by his side, checking for breath and a pulse. Jeffrey came back, running outside. "Help is on the way!" he yelled. Anna was nearby, on her knees, crying silently, with Jessica in hysterics next to her. Ooh, hysterics means when you're so upset, you're hysterical. You're not even making sense. You're not thinking. You're just beside yourself. Jessica was screaming and crying, "Mr. Terupt, no, no!" Lexi and I both stood back watching, alone. As my mind replayed that snowy day, I heard Jessica's yelling all over again. And then I suddenly realized the frantic cries were for real, except now they came from Danielle. "Grandma! No! No!" Danielle had pushed her way through the crowd to discover that her grandmother was the one on the ground. She dropped to her knees and fell to pieces. Anna was right there with her, like she had been with Jessica last year. She wrapped her arm around Danielle. Mr. T and Luke knelt by Danielle's grandma. Jessica and Miss Newberry stood nearby. I stayed back, frozen in place. I didn't know what to do other than watch, and I didn't even like doing that, but it was another one of those times when you couldn't just turn away. Luke, on the other hand, knew how to respond. Practice might make perfect for some things, like wrestling, for example. I know I keep getting better every time I drill a move, but there are other things where no matter how much you practice, if you don't have it, then you're never going to. I'd been through this scene with Mr. T, Asher, and now Danielle's grandma, and I could tell you I wasn't getting any better with experience. I didn't have what it took in these moments, but Luke did. "Evelyn, can you hear me?" Mr. T called over her. No response. "Evelyn, are you okay?" Still no response. Then I saw Luke do his thing. He held his ear close to her chest and pressed two fingers against her neck. Our Boy Scout, with his first aid badge, wasn't such a dork anymore. "There's no pulse," Luke said. "We need to start CPR." Her airway was clear. Mr. T opened Grandma Evelyn's mouth and made sure. Then he started pushing on her chest. "Grandma, no!" Danielle cried. "Fight! Fight!" Mr. T kept going until Jeffrey showed up. "Excuse us. Watch out, please. We're here to help." Jeffrey called out. The crowd started to part so Jeffrey could easily get through, along with the two EMTs that he'd found at the first aid station. An EMT is an emergency medical technician, so like a paramedic. There was always a first aid station at the carnival. Usually, the responders dealt with a few little kids getting skinned knees, nothing more. One year, when it was unusually hot, they helped someone who got dehydrated, but that was the most challenging situation the carnival had ever needed to handle. The EMTs weren't paramedics, just regular citizens, a man and a woman who volunteered. And there's a lot of people who volunteer, like fire departments in a lot of country and rural communities. They're only made of volunteers. A lot of small places that can't afford to keep people on paid every day to do those kinds of jobs, we rely on volunteers. Just like right now in the medical system, there are some people who are volunteering to come back into the workforce to act as doctors and as nurses right now. It's pretty amazing. Jeffrey stepped aside when he reached Grandma Evelyn, so the EMTs had room. The guy carried this black case. Luke told me later on that it was an AED. That stands for an automated external defibrillator. It's like a computer device that tells what to do to an unconscious person, and it has those pads, that shock you. The woman carried your classic orange first aid kit. And this was where it got interesting. "Grandma, no!" The man cried. He dropped the black case and fell to his knees. This is the paramedic. "Charlie!" Danielle sobbed. The man twisted around. "What happened?" He looked at Danielle, desperate for an answer. "I don't know." "Where's Grandpa and Mom and Dad?" Charlie said. "I don't know." "Mom!" Anna called out. She rushed over to the woman. "It's okay, honey. We're going to help. Stay back." So the paramedics for the festival were Anna's mom and Charlie. I couldn't believe it. What were the chances? Charlie didn't handle finding his grandmother on the ground any better than Danielle. I couldn't blame him. So Anna's mom took over. She never lost focus. "Do you have a pulse?" she asked Mr. T. "Not yet," and he kept pushing. Now, those are chest compressions. So he's doing those very regularly on her chest. And the beat to that, to do it, to keep someone alive is, I believe it goes, ha, 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 staying alive, staying alive. Now, there's even machines that can do chest compressions to keep somebody supported. Again, this is all until they get proper medical help. Mr. Terupt kept pushing. "Open the AED," Luke said this, pointing to the black case. "It'll tell us what to do. I've used one at the Boy Scouts before." Anna's mom opened the case. "Apply pads." The robot voice came from the case as instructed. Anna's mom pulled these sticky pads out of the case, and Mr. T stopped CPR, ripped Grandma Evelyn's shirt open, and at least she had a bra on. At least it was plain white and nothing crazy like Mrs. Williams' underwear that year. But then Anna's mom cut the bra right in half. I almost thought they were going to need to hook the AED to me next. I almost passed out. They attached the sticky pads to Grandma Evelyn's skin. "Analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient." The crowd grew very still, all of us waiting to hear what the robot voice would say next. "Shock advised." The crowd gasped. "Stay clear." A surge of electricity was sent to Grandma Evelyn's body, causing her to jump and twitch. "Grandma!" Danielle yelled. "Analyzing heart rhythm." We were back to holding our breaths and each other. I held Lexi, but not in one of those boyfriend-girlfriend embraces. Any romance we had that night was long gone. This was a hug between two scared friends, nothing more. Then I felt someone else touch on the back of my shoulder. It was my dad. Pulse reestablished. Suddenly, there were small smiles and sighs of relief. I could tell that everyone felt hopeful. I did, and I felt it in Dad's squeeze, too. Seconds later, the ambulance arrived. It tore across the field, throwing mud everywhere. Real paramedics quickly loaded Danielle's grandma into the back, the black case still attached to her. Then the ambulance threw more mud from the tires as it sped away. The gathered crowd started moving in all different directions again. Lexi spotted her mother and ran to her, leaving me with my father. Everyone else was gone. Dad wrapped his arm around me, and we walked to the car. Would he have put his arm around me last year if he'd been with me on that snowy day? I could have used him then. But he was with me, right now. Things had changed. This was the first time I could ever remember my father showing me any kind of affection. I wasn't going to forget it. End of chapter. End of month. Next month will be May.